Hello everybody, it's Miss Appia. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about responding to a thematic question within Of Mice and Men. We'll be looking at this question. Explore how Steinbeck presents loneliness in Of Mice and Men. Before we go into the planning and the crafting of our essay, it's really important that we look at the assessment objectives that we are being assessed against. AO1 is worth 20 marks, and here you're being tested on your ability to include relevant quotation, the best quotations to help you in exploring a particular theme or a particular character or a particular contextual idea, basically using the quotes to help you to understand the focus of the question. AO4 is the contextual ideas, and I would like to emphasize here using relevant quotation. So relevant contextual ideas to help you to explain and interweave it, as it says for level 5. It's about the understanding of the relevant relationship between text and context, and you're doing it in a way that is integrated within your essay. It's not a standalone idea, but you've interweaved it and integrated it perfectly within your essay. We're going to be using these concepts to really delve into our planning, looking at how we can layer textual ideas. So how are you going to use your quotes to show the theme of loneliness? How are we going to use relevant contextual knowledge to explain and deepen our understanding of the theme of loneliness to the examiner? And we're going to be using the concept of a dive, which I will talk more about in a second. So within our plan, we're going to be focusing on these three characters. These three characters will form the basis and the structure of our paragraphs and of our essay. The first character is Crooks, because he's a clear character when you're talking about loneliness. He lives away from the ranch, and there's so many different layers that we can explore. Curley's wife being the only woman on the ranch, and we have Candy being the only elderly person on the ranch as well. We see how he also experiences loneliness within the novel and also within the ranch. So the first character we're going to look at is Crooks, and we're going to do so through this quote. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. I'm struggling to do the American accent, so I'm not going to try that today. So if you imagine a swimming pool and you're taking in a dive, the first dive is our first sort of analysis, our first ideas about Crooks within this quote. And I've written here that Crooks expresses the mental toll of being ostracized due to his race and physical disability. His loneliness reflects the harsh realities of discrimination on the ranch. Now we want to go in a bit deeper now. We know that we're marked on AO1 and AO4. So during the 1930s, racial segregation was widespread in the US, and Crooks' isolation in the barn symbolizes the systematic discrimination faced by African Americans. We're going in a bit deeper now. Through this, we can see that Crooks' longing for companionship, it highlights a fundamental human need for belonging and understanding. His defensive attitude often masks a deep vulnerability. So just as a tip here, you could always include another quote as a third dive or as a fourth dive, and then you would repeat the process again to strengthen your idea of Crooks, because there's so many more quotes that we can use when talking about the character of Crooks in relation to the theme of loneliness. I've just picked this quote because I think it helps us to begin that conversation and to begin that exploration. To construct this paragraph, we're going to use these two sentence stems. Furthermore, and pressing upon this further, one could argue that ... I'm going to show you what this looks like when we put it all together. So remember the 3 dives, the 3 layers that we've got for Crooks so far. And this is what it looks like. End of Mice and Men, Steinbeck effectively explores the theme of loneliness through marginalized characters on the ranch. Firstly, Steinbeck utilizes the character of Crooks to emphasize the devastating impact of isolation. Crooks' experience as the only black man on the ranch highlights the compounded effects of racial discrimination and physical disability. His statement, "A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody," you can see how the quote has been interweaved in there. And then our first dive expresses the mental toll of being ostracized due to his race and physical disability. His loneliness reflects the harsh realities of discrimination on the ranch, as highlighted in "A Guy Goes Nuts." Remember, you're not marked on language or structure. We didn't see that in the assessment objectives, so we don't need to zoom in on the word guy or goes and or nuts, etc. You're just doing AO1 and AO4, showing your understanding of the text whilst interweaving contextual ideas. And our first sentence stem is furthermore. Furthermore, set during the 1930s, a time of widespread racial segregation in the United States, Steinbeck uses, so I'm conscious that this is a craft. Steinbeck has deliberately constructed Crooks to be, his character to be in this way. So I am using the word, I'm using the writer's name here. Steinbeck uses Crooks' isolation in the ranch to perhaps symbolize the systematic discrimination faced by African Americans. Our second sentence stem, pressing upon this idea further, one could argue that Crooks' assertion also reinforces the importance of companionship despite his bitterness on the ranch. This could highlight a fundamental human need for belonging and understanding. It's exactly what I wrote down in my dives. So if you imagine you've got the question, you draw a little line and write Crooks, quickly jot down 3 things that you can say. And as a challenge, if you're really going for those top marks, we need to include another quote to support it or more contextual ideas. Our second character is Curley's wife, and our key quote is here: "Why can't I talk to you? I never get to talk to nobody. I get awful lonely." Our first dive is Curley's wife's frustration arises from her role as a possession within her marriage and the suspicion with which the ranch workers view her. They see her as a threat to their own stability rather than a person seeking companionship. The phrase "I get awful lonely" is a direct expression of her vulnerability. So we're now diving in deeper now within the quote. Her loneliness encourages the reader to see her as more than a flirtatious figure, instead understanding her as a tragic character longing for basic human connection. This is a similar thing that we see with Crooks as well. Both of these characters are seeking, they're longing, on the quest for human connection because of their loneliness, even though they are surrounded by people on the ranch. Our third dive, we have to have at least one contextual ideas within our dives. The Great Depression further exacerbated women's marginalization as economic pressures reinforced traditional gender roles. Steinbeck uses Curley's wife to critique how these expectations trapped women, denying them personal fulfillment and relationship. Now, again, we're going to use the same sentence then here within our paragraph, and let's see how the analysis that I've just spoken you through within the context, let's see what this looks like within our second paragraph of this essay. Another character, so I'm using the word another to signal that I am talking about a different character now. Another character Steinbeck uses to explore the theme of loneliness is Curley's wife. Steinbeck shows the reader how Curley's wife's frustration arises from, this is our first dive, her role as a possession within her marriage and the suspicion with which the ranch workers view her. They see her as a threat to their own stability. And then I go on to say, furthermore, the phrase "I get awful lonely" is a direct expression of her vulnerability, which highlights her isolation on the ranch. Perhaps her loneliness encourages the reader to see her as more than a flirtatious figure, instead understanding her as a tragic character longing for basic human connection. And then now our second sentence term is pressing upon this idea further. One could argue that the context of the Great Depression further reinforced their situation, as economic pressures reinforced traditional gender roles, confining women to subordinate position. Steinbeck uses Curley's wife to critique how these societal expectations trapped women, denying them personal fulfillment and meaningful relationships. Now, this is just one quote, and we've been able to dive in at least 3 times to explain our ideas. There's so much more that we can say about Curley's wife when it comes to the theme of loneliness. The fact that she's the only woman on the ranch, she's constantly positioned at the door, by the door, always looking in, seeking for that human connection and never receiving it. So these are all ideas that you can explore when it comes to Curley's wife. And then for our final character, we're going to be looking at Candy. And our key quote here is, "I ain't got no relatives nor nothing." Our first dive of this quote is an AO1 and an AO4 one mixed together. Steinbeck highlights how the economic hardships of the 1930s left many elderly workers like Candy completely isolated. We're diving in deeper. As an older worker with a disability, Candy fears he'll be discarded as soon as he's no longer able to contribute. This fear reflects the ageism prevalent during the 1930s, when older workers were often considered a burden rather than valued for their experience. I'm now going to introduce a quote in my third dive, a very short, brief quote to expand on my ideas. The parallel between Candy's fear of being canned and the fate of his old dog highlights society's harsh treatment of the elderly, who were often seen as expendable once they could no longer work. Again, I've got the 2-sentence stems. Don't forget this in the exam. Furthermore, and pressing up on this idea further. And this is our paragraph for Candy. So imagine our third paragraph now. Steinbeck effectively explores loneliness. I've always got the key word, the key theme within the question in my topic sentence, in my thesis sentence, to really make sure that I'm being clear. Steinbeck effectively explores loneliness through the character of Candy, particularly highlighting the ageism faced by older workers during the 1930s. My first dive here, my second dive here is the economic hardships of the Great Depression left many elderly individuals like Candy isolated and vulnerable with little to no social support. Candy's admission, and notice I'm not saying I know this because it says or this is shown. I am using the character and I'm using the character to introduce the quote that I would like to use. Candy's admission, "I ain't got no relatives nor nothing," emphasizes his complete isolation and lack of familial connections, which makes his reliance on the ranch for companionship even paramount. As an older worker with a disability, Candy lives in constant fear of being discarded as soon as he's no longer deemed useful. This clearly reflects on the harsh realities of ageism during this period. First sentence stem. Furthermore, or moreover, if you want to use that as well to mix it up a little bit, older workers were often considered a burden rather than valued for their experience, which only deepened their sense of alienation. Pressing on this idea further, Steinbeck draws an important parallel between Candy's fear of being canned and the fate of his old dog. This could symbolize society's disregard for the elderly once they are no longer able to contribute. Through Candy, Steinbeck critiques this dehumanizing treatment, showing how it intensifies loneliness and robs individuals of dignity and purpose. So here we've explored three characters and how they show or and how Steinbeck uses these characters to explore the theme of loneliness. Final tips from me to make sure that you are securing the top marks and the top bands for this question is to use the concept I've just showed you about dives to layer your analysis of your quotations and also your contextual ideas. And remember, I've just given 3 dives, but you can always go in a bit deeper, introduce new quotes to layer and deepen your understanding and to show off to your teachers and to the examiner that you really know the text. AO1. Number 2, explain your evidence. What does your evidence tell the reader about the character or theme? And number 3 is key. It's all about relevant contextual ideas. So for example, if you have Crooks and you're talking about women's lack of fulfillment or the fact that women had little or limited opportunities, that does not really relate to Crooks. You need to make sure that, for example, with Crooks, we didn't speak about this, but you should be talking about the impact of the Jim Crow laws on him on the ranch and also in wider society. So include relevant contextual ideas such as the Great Depression, migrant workers, and the American dreams within your essays. If you like more videos like this, subscribe and check out the other videos. I'll be linking below a link to where you can get some resources to further deepen your understanding of these characters and also these themes. Thank you and good luck within your exams.